So Bitcoin gives me hope, and that's why we're here. Like I said, I think now in 2023, we're at a point where everybody seems to understand that there's something going wrong. Nobody can afford anything. Everyone, there's all kinds of things that are happening. Society is, in a lot of places, really crumbling before our eyes. But I think that a lot of people don't understand why, and it's hard to understand the solution to something if you don't understand why it's happening. So again, this is why I think it's so important for people to understand Bitcoin. The why really, I've been tweeting about this a lot lately, the why really has nothing to do with race or politics or any of the things that they want you to believe. Society is being divided and it's a distraction, right? So the more that you understand the system, the fiat system, and the way that the corruption works, the more that you'll understand how imperative it is that we embrace and utilize Bitcoin. So why? The why is fiat. When I'm talking to people who are new to Bitcoin, I try really hard to think back to before I understood everything that I understand and what did I not know, right? So I was traveling the globe, I was living in Dubai, I was working in China, I had this big job. And if I'm honest, at the time, if you had asked me what is fiat, I don't know that I would have known. How many people in here know what the word fiat means? Okay, so you guys are doing better than I was. So let's talk about it a little
car,
bit.
isn't it?
Yeah, a little Italian car.
Exactly. So fiat money is inconvertible paper money made legal tender by government decree. So yes, so fiat is just government money. But the important part is that it's not backed by a commodity. So a commodity is something like gold or silver. Fiat money, again, it's just government issued currency. So the government issues the currency. It is not convertible or redeemable for anything. The only thing that gives it its value is the government. So what could go wrong? So is the dollar not backed by gold? Is the number one question I get when this comes up. Does anyone here think that the dollar is backed by gold?
A lot of people do.
Yes, so more than 1/3 of the United States population believes that the dollar is still backed by gold. So on August 15th, which we had the anniversary a couple days ago, the United States temporarily suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets. So like many other temporary government decrees, we were supposed to only go off of the gold standard temporarily.
Yeah.
The gold standard was established in 1944 after the World War in order to create a global flowing currency, and other countries were using fiat currencies that were pegged to the dollar. So we abandoned the gold standard to curb inflation and prevent other foreign nations from overburdening the system by redeeming their dollars for gold.
The darn French.
Yeah.
So the government is controlling the money. Well, who is that, right? So sometimes people are like, oh, the government, you're such a conspiracy theorist, like you think everything is a psyop, all this stuff. So I wanted to touch base. So the government uses central banks to manage the money. So what is a central bank? Also, there's a lot of conversation lately about CBDCs. And we can't understand the true threat of a CBDC without understanding what a central bank is. Central bank digital currency. So a central bank is a financial institution given privileged control over the production and distribution of a money. So they can produce our dollars. If you have not yet gone down the Creature from Jekyll Island rabbit hole, I highly recommend that everyone reads this book. So this book digs very deeply into the creation of the Federal Reserve and how the central banks were all created. So this is going to help you understand how fiat currencies around the world are managed, manipulated, and controlled. So it's 1971, we go off the gold standard. What could go wrong? This is what went wrong. So this is a chart of the US national debt going back, and you can see very clearly where we abandoned the gold standard. So this is what fiat does, including these graphs I pulled from there. So we have cumulative inflation, the consumer price index, and the US national debt, all of which you can see are running rampantly out of control. And these are just the numbers that they are honest about, if you believe the numbers. Fiat always fails. This is another thing that I'm not gonna lie, I've never been a huge fan of history, so I didn't understand history as well as I do now until I just got into Bitcoin and started studying the macroeconomic topics that we talk about, fiat currencies, all of these things. So why do fiat currencies fail? They get debased and inflated. The strength and the stability of the government that issues the currency, it can be challenged, questioned. There's all kinds of economic factors. Debt is created. Confidence is what gives the dollar a lot of its value. So as people lose confidence in the dollar, the currency starts to weaken. And then, of course, you have hyperinflation, which we're seeing with fiat currencies all over the world happening now. And I think there's a case to be made if you look at the US debt, that it may happen here one day. So fiat currencies do not last. The US dollar is currently the world global reserve currency. If you're watching what's happening with BRICS, you are aware, I don't know how many people are aware of all of the things that are happening with BRICS, but BRICS is trying to take over the dollar. They are leading global de-dollarization. If the US, so right now most of the US dollar's value comes from the fact that we are still the world reserve currency and the US petrodollar. And if either of those two things is shaken or removed, we are going to be in a lot of trouble. I did write this a year or two ago, and this feedback is weakening. We're seeing everyone everywhere go broke, struggle to afford groceries. I think people are really waking up to the fact that something is wrong. So I'm not hearing this as much, that people feel like the dollar is strong. But over the past few years, that has been a significant sort of piece of feedback that I get in the States in particular. So currency debasement is basically when they run the money printer. When any form of currency that is made from a precious metal is mixed. So this is how, when we had gold, this is how they would debase gold. I was hoping Gen Z might be here because for those of you that know Gen Z and his mom, he made one of the best videos I've ever seen with a few cups and some Kool-Aid. And he just pours water into each cup of Kool-Aid. And it's a great example of, you're watering down the Kool-Aid. When they print more money, they're watering down, they're devaluing the value of the dollar that we own or hold. So there are 80% of all dollars in existence today have been printed since January of 2020. As of today, there are more than $40 trillion in existence. At the beginning of 2020, there were only $4 trillion in existence. So again, even if you go back a couple of years, we were having these conversations about billions of dollars. And now we're talking about trillions of dollars. This is hyperinflation. You can see all around the world. I think a lot of you are familiar with what's happening in a lot of these places. If you don't know what happened in Cyprus in 2013, I highly recommend looking at that. That's a really alarming case of what can go wrong with fiat currencies. Basically, they were worried about liquidity. So they shut down all the banks overnight. And if you had over $100,000 in your bank account, They just took it out. Literally, it was gone. So again, a lot of people feel that would never happen here. On Argentina, the Turkish lira, the Nigerian, Japan I put on the watch list. Japan's currency is devaluing very quickly. They are not quite in a hyperinflation situation, but you can see that we're familiar with a lot of these countries. Maybe you knew about Cyprus, maybe you didn't. But most people have heard of Venezuela, Lebanon. The instances of this happening are happening more frequently, more often. It's sort of spreading to the West in a way that I think a lot of Western countries used to feel that they were untouchable. Bitcoin doesn't need to be explained in a lot of other countries around the world. If you go to Nigeria, if you go to Lebanon, if you go to Argentina, the case for Bitcoin is very, very clear. And so my mission is to save as many people in the United States as I can before it's too late or I am out of energy. Convert your dollars into Bitcoin while you still can. So corruption, fiat manipulation. Now that we understand a little bit more about fiat currency and how it's manipulated and debased, I'm going to give you some of the real world examples of things that I witnessed firsthand. Lots of corruption. This is the part of the bio of the press release that got issued when I took the job in foreign direct investment that I took. And I include this on the slide just to sort of start my story because this should have been my first red flag. There are several lies in this bio or things that aren't necessarily true. I don't have a master's degree. I did not actually work with Uber. I worked very closely with Uber. I didn't work for them. And I really have never done any women-owned things. So when someone else wrote this bio, it got published as a press release. My mom called me and said, "Why are they saying that you have a master's degree? You don't have a master's degree." And I said, "I know, I told them it wasn't true." And they said, "It doesn't matter. It makes everyone look good." It made me look good, which made them look good. So that should have been my first red flag with the job that I took, but it wasn't. Like I said, I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I was winning. I had gotten recruited into this amazing job. I was making six figures. I had an unchecked expense account. I was flying all over the world. Everyone was like, "Look at you. You're doing great." I was not doing great. So I got paid to fly from Dubai to Bogota for a photo op. It's a very long flight. I flew first class, obviously. And I'm going to tell a modified version of this story. So we were in Shanghai hanging out late at night in a venue where people dance. And a decision was made that an economic development award would be given to a certain advisement group in Bogota because this gentleman wanted to hang out with this gentleman's secretary. So that economic development award represented a $300 million contract. And that decision was made at 2 a.m. in a bar with no lights on, lots of alcohol involved. And the reason that they sent me from Dubai to Bogota was so that I could be in the photo because they wanted to be represented as a part of the award. And they couldn't risk having anyone in the meeting or in the photo that might question why this decision was made. So they gave me an unchecked expense account and said, "Hey, go to Bogota, be in the picture." I didn't really understand what was happening, but in retrospect, there are so many stories like this that make it really, really clear that everything is just insane and that you can't trust anything and that fiat currency is bound to promote corruption and destroy society. So people think that I'm a little bit of a doomer. I like to say I am not a doomer, I am just a realist. And if we don't start being real and really honest about the fact that these things not only happen, but they happen all the time. These are not one-off exceptions. This is how the world is functioning. The people at Davos are the people in these pictures, and they're the people making the decisions that affect your lives every single day. So as another example, we had a $20 million contract with a company in China called CFLD, and the China Fortune Land Development. They were the second largest land developer in China. So this was before Evergrande. This was a couple of years before Evergrande. We spent a ton of time in China putting this deal together, a deal with CFLD, basically providing them with research and numbers to support the decisions that they were making, and so that they could get more money and grow. So they were growing. They were building entire communities. You can see here. So we went out and took tours of some of what you may now know as a ghost city. Of course, at the time, we were told that the cities were 30 to 40% occupied, which was a little confusing because they landed a helicopter in the middle of the street and there was no one to disturb. We took all these tours. No big deal. Not shady at all. There were like multi-million-dollar facilities that we spent days and days being given tours of all of these facilities. There's 2 scale models of the cities that CFLD was developing. And so again, CFLD was sort of secondary to Evergrande. Evergrande was doing the same thing, just with a little bit more money. So I didn't know what was going on. What I did know is that it wasn't real. But we all went home and pretended that it was real. And everyone got paid.
That's a picture of one of those fake cities?
This is a picture in a residential zone in one of the fake cities that we were told was 30% occupied. We spent days and days and days there and never saw a single person. This was my boss at the time, and this was our counterpart with CFLD. So we walked those streets. You can see how beautiful the grass is. It's all for show. So Evergrande, at the end of the day, in the first 2 years when Evergrande fell, they lost $81 billion. The final estimates were about $350 billion. And then, of course, this enabled the perfect opportunity for China to print more money, debasing their own currency. One thing that is really striking to me, again, is if you go back and look at the numbers in the trillions of dollars, 350 billion all of a sudden doesn't sound that huge. It was a huge number. And I just think that that's really important for everyone to recognize that we are now in a place where 350 billion doesn't sound as big of a deal, because we're talking about numbers in the trillions.
Yep.
But it's a lot of money. The next thing we have is this event called MIPIM in France. This was one of the next places that I was sent. So MIPIM is, it's not a private event. There's about 25,000 people from around the world who go there. 90 countries are represented, and there's generally about 2,500 exhibitors. But most of the events at MIPIM are private. So you can buy a ticket. It's about $5,000 to buy a single ticket to attend this real estate conference. There is a waiting list generally. I got a ticket because we had historical tickets. So if you go, you get invited to purchase your ticket the next year. And there is a waiting list to attend the event. So it's a public event, but it is hard and very expensive to get into. It's a real estate conference, and it's very adjacent to what's happening in Davos. So a lot of the people that are attending Davos are convening in MIPIM prior to that event. So this is some of the feedback as I was, in retrospect, looking through all of the things that I had been through and trying to make sense of all of it. This was some of the feedback that I found online about MIPIM, which again was one of the events that I had been to. So this, every year for a week in March, this stretch of the French Riviera, the event is in Cannes, is transformed into a global property trading zone, a souped up real estate market where entire swaths of cities are put up for sale to the highest bidder. So they're playing at a global level with your lives, your everyday life. What's happening in the community next door to you could very well have been decided at MIPIM in Cannes, at a private party that you would certainly not have been allowed to have attended. So this is about MIPIM, the year that I had attended. It said we're benefiting from Chinese investment at the moment, and there's a lot of interest in our enterprise zone. This is the last thing that I want to talk about, and that is enterprise zones, also known as FTZs, special economic zones. So how many of you are familiar with these? A couple of you, okay, at least not all of you. So these are the most corrupt places on earth that most of you don't even know exist. Port authorities. So there's a lot of laws and regulation that are in place that you might assume prevent some of the corruption and manipulation that we're talking about from happening. And there's a very specific way that they get around not worrying about the corruption or the manipulation. And that is by doing trade and deals in special trade zones. If you have ever been to Dubai, you know that there are different economic zones, and they're set up for different types of business activity. And Dubai generally manages their economic zones I don't think that there's as much corruption there. I'm a little biased. I like the UAE a lot. But the more corrupt the country, generally the more corrupt the zones are. So I went to a lot of free trade zone conferences in places like Bangkok, Cartagena, and Doha. These are very, very popular free trade zones, and they generally align with the most corrupt countries because that's where you can go to do whatever you want. So all of the things that we're seeing happen, most of them are being done through the free trade zones. And so I think people look at the corruption and sort of the craziness and think, well, whoever's doing that is a criminal, so they'll get caught. But they're not a criminal if they're doing it legally within a free trade zone that provides exemptions to the law. Yeah. And you go to these conferences and you start to see the same people at all of the conferences. You think that these conferences are happening all over the world and that in each part of the world, communities, cities, states, economic areas will send representatives to their local conference. That is not what's happening. It's the same 200, 300, 400, 500 people going to all of the events, going to all of the conferences. And I know this because for this brief period of time, I was one of those people. So fiat currency allows for all of this. Now you may understand my hatred of fiat currency and why this is my favorite shirt. Bitcoin fixes this, and this is what gives me hope. It really, truly does, the Bitcoin. I think it's important to decide for yourself and sort of think about, am I saving, am I trading, or am I investing? Because there you can get confused. You put your money in, all of a sudden the price runs up. Do I sell it? Do I not sell it? So I think it's an important case or an important thing to think about for those of you that are new into the Bitcoin space. And my case is for saving in Bitcoin, not necessarily trading. Of course, saving your money is a type of an investment, but I like to tell people, instead of saving your dollars in the bank where they're going to get debased, save them in Bitcoin sats where they're going to continue to increase in value. So we've got the shopping cart example of inflation versus deflation. I'm sure that this is not a surprise to anyone here. And Again, so why save in Bitcoin? Bitcoin is an electronic payment system based on cryptographic proof instead of trust, because we cannot trust anyone, and you don't have to trust anyone. The Bitcoin white paper, if you haven't read that, it's only 8 pages. I highly recommend reading the Bitcoin white paper if you haven't. Bitcoin is verifiable mathematically. Stephen has talked about this in depth. It can be verified. It is mathematical truth. Bitcoin is not a fiat currency. I had to say that one last time. The code cannot be corrupted. It's hard money, which cannot be inflated or debased. There is a fixed amount, 21 million. Most of you in here probably are familiar with that. There will never be any more Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is for everyone. You don't have to be invited to the party. You don't have to be registered to do business. You don't have to have access. There's no requirement or prerequisite. It is for every person, every community, every state, and as we're starting to see, every country, hopefully. The countries that hopefully will succeed. Bitcoin is permissionless. So whatever you want to do, you can go out and do it without anyone's permission. If you save in Bitcoin, you really, really will not need permission for anyone to do anything, and that, to me, is true freedom. So Bitcoin gives us hope and freedom.
All right.